Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is going to be the afternoon session on the Cooperation SIG. It is about to begin the SIG session, but prior to that, there is an election for the co-chair, because the term of the co-chair is going to be ending in this APNIC apricot. So I would request now the APNIC staff, Mr. Sunny, to conduct the election as per the SIG guidelines.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as Chair mentioned, as per the SIG guidelines, we have to run the elections first of the agenda of this session. This is the co-chair election for term ending for Billy Cheon, who is right here in front of me. Call for nominations sent to the Cooperation SIG and the APNIC mailing list on 23rd of Tuesday, 2018, and nominations closed on this Friday, 23rd. The term for the co-chairs is 2 years, and the responsibilities as listed in the SIG guidelines, so you can find them online as well, but some of them is listed here. They must attend at least one of the 2 APNIC conferences that we host in this region, and they have to help the chair in formulation of the agenda, monitor the SIG discussions, what's going on here, and undertake any other responsibilities as per the discussion with the chair. The election procedures, this is quite important. Candidates must be present in the room. Candidates have 2 minutes to speak to the participants if they like to share something. Voting is by those present in the room, excluding APNIC staff and RIR staff. The election is decided by a count of show of hands, so please raise your hand when I call for it until we take a count. The count is taken by the Secretariat staff, my colleagues, and the candidate with the large number of counts is elected for this position. We received 3 nominations, and they're listed as per the order that we received. The first one is Dr. Rajesh Ramachandran. Second one is the current co-chair, Billy M. Cheon. And the third one is Bikram Shrestha. So I'd like to invite, if these candidates are present in the room, I'd like to invite just to say a few words, 2 minutes maximum. So I'd like to invite Dr. Rajesh Ramachandran. As I said, as per the SIG guidelines, the candidate must be in the room. Is he there? Rajesh Ramachandran? Okay, I'll move on. Billy Cheon, please, if you like to say. You can use,
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Billy. As Sunny just said, I have been co-chairing this SIG for the last 2 years, pretty much enjoyed. Hopefully, I want to continue my another term, but also another thing in my mind is that if there's anyone who has willing to serve for this SIG, I'm willing to hand over the position, because the position is for the community, not for myself. So this is all what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Billy, and good luck. Bikram Shrestha?
Thank you, Sunny. Chairperson Dr. Govinda sir, and distinguished guests, and my colleague. This is my first apricot meeting, and I have been serving Internet Society from last 10 years. I am the current president for Internet Society Nepal chapter, and I am the heading e-banking department of Sanima Bank. Professionally, I am heading. I had given my nomination for co-chair because I would like to say that to the community I have been serving from last 20 decades with national as well as internationally. I am the fellow for ICANN Toronto 45. Then my journey started from ICANN 45 till last ICANN meeting 60. So now I want to contribute, I want to volunteer in Apricot as well as EPNIC as well. That's why I gave my nomination. I hope that you will support me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bikram, and good luck. So this is a show of hand excluding APNIC staff and RIR staff. So now I'll call a show of hand for Dr. Rajesh Ramachandran is not in the room, so he's ineligible to contest in the elections. So I'll call show of hands for in support of Billy Chion. Please raise your hands and keep it up so we can take a count. We done? Thank you. Now I'll call for show of hands for Bikram Srestha, again excluding APNIC staff and RIR staff. Just keep your hands raised, please, while we take a count. Yeah, thank you. Just wait for the tally papers if they. Thanks, Adam and George, for taking the count. So we have count confirmed. The majority of the votes were for Bikram Srestha. Congratulations, Bikram Srestha. Now I'll pass it on the floor to the chair for the Cooperation 6 session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. And now we begin the Cooperation SIG session now here. As you are all aware, the Cooperation SIG is a forum for discussing the broader public policy issues pertaining to the Internet and its governance. I am presently the chair of the Cooperation SIG along with Mr. Billy of South Korea. Please come here. This year I will invite the panelists for this session, Mr. Craig, Mr. Richard, Mr. Nabinda, Mr. Anurag, and Alice. So this year's theme for the Cooperation SIG is who is data accuracy, present status, and its challenges. APNIC, who is database, is always in the discussion and gained importance as demand for IP addresses and are increasing exponentially due to increasing internet users and emerging IoT ecosystem. As you are aware, APNIC maintains the WHOIS database, which contains the loads of information like IP address delegation, information about contacts of network, contacts for administration for the network, technical contacts, abuse contact, and so on. It is important to keep the registration correct and updated when there is a change in the WHOIS database. The traditional clients of the WHOIS services are network operators, security agencies who need to trace operational and security issues which are identified by IP address. These days, more people are starting to rely on WHOIS, especially in the tracking security and criminal investigations. So why this session? Because we had earlier in the APNIC policy SIG, one of the sessions devoted on this WHOIS database. But what really needs is a continuous discussion on this, because WHOIS data quality in the corporation SIG now is that we need everyone's involvement. So your contribution is essential. And APNIC is of course, happy to support the members' needs to whatever way it is to be done. We are also happy to help promote awareness and importance and the tools and so on. In this forum, we are seeking a solution, working with the APNIC and other communities for the best solution. So now I will invite Mr. Craig, my co-chair, Mr. Billy, to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. Billy again. Since 1980, WHOIS database serves the needs of different stakeholders, such as ISPs, LEA, and businesses and individual users. And now, I think WHOIS database faces challenges because its use expanded beyond what was envisaged at the first place. So I think it's very timely for us to get together here and talk about how we can improve the situation. And so for that, I'm very happy to have a good line of speakers who can present their views and possibly their industry's views as well. And also, my company, KISA, Korea Internet and Security Agency, as it stands for, WHOIS database is very important issue. So I think there's 2 points we put focus on. First is accuracy in WHOIS database. To keep the accuracy, we work very closely with the APNIC and also with our ISPs. We have a monthly meeting, encourage and persuade to keep WHOIS database update. And also, I think another point is that it's really important to educate people how to use WHOIS database properly, especially with the legal enforcement agencies. So last year, we had a very useful workshop in conjunction with the ICANN in Korea for the legal enforcement agency investigators. So I think though I have a couple of words, I want to stop here so that other people can. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. Craig to speak on.
Hello, everyone. I hope it's okay if I just sit here and chat. It's a discussion between us. My name is Craig Ng. I'm the General Counsel of APNIC, the lawyer. That's why I've been asked to start the discussion in this session. I think all of us recognize the utility and the importance of WHOIS. WHOIS has evolved in terms of its use. It started as a white pages directory service to contact network operator whenever there's an issue. And over the years, I think that fundamental job of WHOIS remains to be very, very important. And I think Anurag will probably talk a little bit later on about how network operators actually use WHOIS to deal with issues coming out from network and routing. But over the years, as I said, the use of WHOIS has evolved. IP addresses now has significant value. People are transacting and transferring resources between regions. So I think a lot of IP address brokers, for example, use the whois to identify the resource holder of the IP address. Funds for the transfer of IP addresses are not released unless and until I think people see names being registered within the registry of the RIRs and therefore appearing on the whois. So it's taken, a different position in terms of what it used to be. It is like a title registration system, although I think all of us recognise that IP address is not a property to be owned. It's a contractual right that you have to use the resources whilst it's allocated to you. But over the years now, law enforcement agencies are beginning to spend more time using the whois database for attribution, basically to look at who is behind bad actors and badness on the internet. So the use has evolved, but I think we continue to rely on whois as an accurate and reliable database to find out who the custodian of the IP resources are. But whois accuracy is a different concept. I think it means different thing to different people. There are a lot of issues around privacy. Some people would think that it's a common pack or understanding that if you operate your network on the open internet, then you accept some basic minimum accountability for things that happen on your network, i.e. to be able to point your finger or hold your hand up if things happen on your network to see who is actually behind that. But where does the balance lie in terms of privacy? So should it be completely shut down, i.e. Full protection of privacy, or should it be completely open? And I suspect it's neither of the two extreme, and the balance lies somewhere in between, that the people are prepared to have their name visible and accountable for things that happen on their network. And what does accuracy mean? It means different thing to different people. I think, some people think that the law enforcement agencies would want, when they talk about whois accuracy, to see that the registration detail up to the end user, the person behind the computer. But that's not necessarily the case. Some people think that what the law enforcement agencies want is the one step away from the end user, basically the service, the ISP that's providing network connectivity to the end user. But this is the chance for us to have a discussion around where we think that line is and what the expectations are. And what about the access regime? Is it open access? Can anyone access? And what information should be in there? Should it be just the name and email address? Should it contain date of birth of individuals? Should it have a street address? Should it have more data than that is going to be publicly disclosable and publicly available? So these are questions that I think we need to answer, and I look forward very much to the discussions that we'll have on this panel and with you to see where that lies. But I raised a question about law enforcement and what their expectations are in terms of access to the data and what level of detail they need and registration at what level. At the highest level, 2 levels down, all the way down to the end user. Dick Leaning, you've been at Europol and before that, the National Crime Agency in the UK. What is the law enforcement agency's expectation? I mean, do they expect to see data all the way to the individual?
Yeah, good afternoon. Rich Leaning from RIPE NCC, and as Craig has said, I used to be a law enforcement officer, now working for one of the registries. Law enforcement only want the organisation or entity that is responsible for an IP range of addresses. That is it. That's all they expect from us. All they expect from the database is allow them to contact the service provider that's having connectivity to the end users, what they call the end users, the people under the keyboard. That's all they want. The interesting thing about law enforcement is what they believe accuracy is and what we believe to be accuracy is. And this is one of the conversations that I have all the time. with law enforcement around our 76 countries and further afield is, for a law enforcement, accuracy of information is that I am Richard Leaning, I live at that address, that is my telephone number, that is my email address, etc., etc. All that are linked together, verified, validated that I am who I am and I live where I live. In the database, sometimes that isn't how we call accurate. As long as the telephone number looks like a telephone number, that is accurate for that data. If the email address looks like an email address, then that is accurate. If a physical address is a physical address, it doesn't matter if the street is in one town, the postcode is in another town, as long as it's populated correctly in the right syntax, that is how some people say is accuracy. That is not accurate for the database. Accurate for law enforcement, what they would like to see in the database. So there's a conflict of interest and misunderstanding of the word accuracy regarding the database. I did have a presentation, but I've already done my 6 minutes, so I can just flick through some because I have it on modern technology. I also have it on my phone. What some of the reasons that we deal with law enforcement is because law enforcement actually came to the RIPE NCC in 2008. It's 10 years that we've been dealing with law enforcement, and they came to us. We didn't go to them, they came knocking on our door in Amsterdam because they wanted to know who we were, what we did, and what was our database all about. So we have spent the last 10 years working very closely with law enforcement, and it's not just law enforcement. I use the term competent authorities. It's any organisation that's mandated to look after the safety of the public, and that's not just law enforcement. There's many other people out there, organisations, that have that same responsibility. So we did a lot of education, we did a lot of training, because what is as important is for law enforcement, and I use that term meaning everyone, that what the database does, but it's also important for them to understand what it doesn't do, because there's still a misconception that it can do this and it can do that, but it can't. So we're trying to educate everyone that we can't, it's not just what it can do, it's what it can't do. Good on there. Oh, yeah, stop at that one. The map. The reason we've got the map on this, because we know where everyone is, but it's really important to emphasise it's just not RIPE NCC that does this type of outreach. We do it in all the RIRs, globally, in different ways, with our different communities and our different agencies. For us, we work very closely with APNIC. We're here with Aaron and with AFRINIC. We do some work with LACNIC as well, but I don't know if anyone from LACNIC's in the room at all. Probably not. So we do an awful lot of work and a lot of outreach on this. Since the 5th of January this year, we have done about 7 or 8 training, educational capacity building within our region once a week. We have been as far as Moscow, Dubai, Lebanon, Armenia. So we are really going out to our communities to do this training. And I use the word communities because I still hear around that law enforcement are not wanted in our communities. They shouldn't be using the database. They shouldn't be, etc., etc. Well, the community is open, and law enforcement and the government and the regulators are part of our community. So we must stop pushing them away, and we must start embracing them and working together for a database that is accurate, because that is basically what we all want when we're talking about the database. I've got other bits, but I can go back to those others. One of the other stuff that we're doing, and I just noticed Craig just looked at me funny, is I hate to use the word ICANN in this environment, but we do participate with the GACS and with the Public Safety Working Group as an observer, just to hear what's going on and seeing what's going on, because it's a mirror image of what's happening here with what's happening over in ICANN. And, as I've mentioned, ICANN, the Public Safety Working Group, is a nice link to Alice, who used to be the co-chair of the Public Safety Working Group at ICANN. Alice, was that smooth?
Very.
Thank you. Thank you. Finished it really in 6 minutes. Now I will request Nabinda Aryal from Nepal Police to give his perspective.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I myself, Nabinda Aryal, Superintendent of Nepal Police, right now working in Central Investigation Bureau. Today, I have mainly focused on the WHOIS accuracy and the challenges, and some case study, and the way forward. I'm not going to go with the connectivity issue. This is the guided connectivity issue, because we take connectivity from the India and recently from northern part of Nepal, that is China. And the IP transit points are basically from the, if you see there, from Chennai, Mumbai, New York, these are some of the examples. And some facts. These are only the statistics. This is directly related to the, in my perspective, as I belongs to law enforcement agency, this statistics is directly proportionate to the investigation issues. If you see there, the population of Nepal is 29 million, more than 29 million, and the number of internet users is more than 63%, and 97% access internet via mobile phone. So now I would like to go to the uses of WHOIS. Basically, WHOIS searches are one of the most common and starting point for the law enforcement agency investigations. That sometimes we also use this, and we have a good output also. But in my slide, I have put some issues, some challenges, and one case study. That is the challenges for us. See the case study here. In August 2017, a victim, a complainant approaches law enforcement agency, or he or she, mentioning that receiving threatening messages, extortion messages, and we traces the IP address. That later found to be pretend to be original. So in return from the service provider, in response from the service provider, you can see that one of the CGNAT, carrier grade network address translation, public IP block, so won't be able to provide the details. So this is the big hurdles or big challenges for the law enforcement agency investigator who is involved in that case. Provided IP is used in some location within Nepal as customer NAT pool. So sometimes the investigation gets complicated. So some of the challenges, this is the internationally proclaimed challenges. In perspective of Nepal, also in perspective of Nepal, Law Enforcement Agency of Nepal. If you see there, one of the main challenges, there are many, among them is the APNIC, whose database itself is not up to date, maybe due to the scarcity or shortage of sufficient IP distribution, or maybe the involvement of broker or mediator. The key challenges, if you see the Nepal perspective, if you see there, when the victim comes to us, when he or she gives the written complaint, when we register the case, there is a 35 days of limitation. We have to finish the investigation, and we have to produce all the documents to the court within 35 days. The challenge comes because the international mediators, the international, all the, like WHOIS database, or maybe Facebook, or maybe Skype, or maybe Viber, it's not in Nepal. It's out of Nepal. So this is the transnational crime issue, trans-border crime issue, we call it. Sometimes these issues comes as considered as organized crime also. And when we start our investigation, the big question comes, we cannot directly contact those who hold the information. There is a chain of custody. So we have to go through regulatory, and from regulatory to the service providers. So when the investigation goes on, in between, the problem comes, from abroad, they have all the information of the suspect, but they always ask for the mutual legal assistance treaty, Sometimes they ask for the international letter of request, sometimes they ask for the letter of regulatory, and they ask for the come through diplomatic channel. So that is a big challenge for the law enforcement agency, especially the investigator who is involved in the incident, the take case of that incident. So way forward or goal, global coordination with regional internet address registry, obviously the public safety organization, seeking industry assistance, collaboration with, this is an example only, American registry internet numbers, maybe within the South and Asia Pacific also, and regional internet address registry communities. Last but not the least, introducing globally coordinated policy in each RI region. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My name is Alice Munywa. I'm here in the capacity of team member for the Internet Cooperation for Assigned Names and Numbers for the Governmental Advisory Committee Capacity Development Workshop. But I also chaired and convened the first public safety working group of the GAC. The public safety working group brings together law enforcement agencies that focus on the intersection between the policies that ICANN develops and the public's and how they impact on public safety. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the Public Safety Working Group, nor am I speaking on behalf of African law enforcement. I'm just simply sharing a few notes regarding how the Public Safety Working Group came into formulation and why law enforcement and governments, for that matter, are increasingly getting engaged in the area of, for example, WHOIS accuracy and issues of public safety. So the Public Safety Working Group was created by the GAC after several law enforcement agencies, including Richard Leaning here, who was, but then Europol, had come together for quite a number of years and had been discussing issues to do with public safety at the ICANN level. And they were then compelled to come together and form the working group under the GAC because they are members of governments. And they came together out of the need for, out of acknowledgement of the way the ICANN multi-stakeholder works. The fact that the multi-stakeholder model and policy making at the ICANN level is decentralized, inclusive, and participatory, and that means that governments, the GAC for that matter, or law enforcement are not necessarily given priority. So the policy development processes are bottom-up, and that meant that law enforcement specifically had to get really engaged to make sure that some of the issues they had to do with public safety were placed on the agenda. So it's from this consideration that the Public Safety Working Group was created, I think in Singapore, I can't really recall the date, and the first meeting took place 2 or 3 years ago. Sorry. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Okay, so we mentioned why is ICANN important for law enforcement agencies? Well, ICANN manages the WHOIS database for domain names, and that there's an increasing, concern or, especially concern regarding how the WHOIS is managed. And as a result, in 2012, for example, ICANN resolved to redefine the purpose of collecting and maintaining access to the registration of data, and also to how to safeguard and protect data. Through this process in 2012, we replaced WHOIS with what we are calling Next Generation Registration Directory Services, and created a working group that's looking at this specifically, and that working group has been working for a while, and I think we're expecting a report. I think DQ may be able to correct me here with the exact dates. As I mentioned, public safety working group members are representing law enforcement interests. Most of them come from law enforcement agencies all over the world, and consumer protection, some governmental agencies, regulatory authorities as well. Okay, so a brief overview of what the public safety working group mandate is within ICANN and the GAC. So one of it is assessing and ensuring that the DNS, the domain name service registration, are not used to propagate or propagate unlawful activity, and then supporting the ability of law enforcement agencies to investigate, prevent, and attribute unlawful activity, cooperating with the various advisory committees, specifically the Security Stability Advisory Committee and others, including the GNSO and CCNSO, and participating in various ICANN working groups. Right now, they're participating in the RDS working group, in the RPM and others that impact on the work of law enforcement. But one important one is that they're meant to be consistently assessing whether or not ICANN is responsive, responds in a timely manner in terms of developing mechanisms that enforce contractual obligations on their clients to ensure that WHOIS, especially because we are talking now in the context of WHOIS, is implemented in the correct way. Anyway. In terms of membership, I mentioned there, it's mostly GAC representatives, members from national or provincial state governments, consumer protection, civil and criminal law enforcement. Currently, the current number is about 90 or 95, with most of them coming from developed countries' law enforcement agencies and consumer protection agencies. Unfortunately, we don't see so many law enforcement agencies coming from more developing region, especially Asia. So I think I'd like to encourage our Nepal colleague to join that working group. We've had a lot of outreach and capacity development work and in various regions. And we had one here. That's the reason why we're here, and we are here during Apricot. And we had a specific session that looked at DNS security and issues of WHOIS, although we did not delve into it specifically. So what happens in this case, if there's a need, a community would have to place that request to the Public Safety Working Group and the GAC and ICANN would be able to provide the support that is required. I've been told my time is up, so thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anurag, and this seems better. So my name is Anurag, and I work at Hurricane Electric. We operate a global backbone. I'd be sharing some of the points around WHOIS from the operator point of view, and it may not be necessarily from just Hurricane's point of view, because we operate a global backbone and we do not necessarily go on the last mile infra. So a lot of challenges around the WHOIS are from global backbone side as well as on the last mile side, where there is a lot more interaction between the police and the legal agencies and the operators. So I'll start with the fact that in our scenario, WHOIS is not only important when we are connecting customers, but also when we are peering. At this point of time, we operate a backbone with over 7,000 peers, and the accuracy of WHOIS becomes extremely important when we are trying to establish a new peering session. And in non-technical words, when we are accepting prefixes from an organization with whom we are peering with. And it becomes extremely important that we are able to find who they are, that we are able to know that they are actually the ones they are claiming, and that can get fuzzy. Trust me, that can get fuzzy, and I'll come on to that in a few minutes. One key point around the WHOIS, especially with the IP WHOIS, the addressing WHOIS, is that there is very low incentive. There's almost no incentive for operators to update WHOIS. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there should be an incentive, but because there is no incentive, it, operators can just go lazy. There are just so many things out on priority. So we often find operators with totally incorrect whois records who we are trying to connect, and it gets complicated in that way. So RIRs can actually work around on things like, there are some models like from domain world. ICANN has a rule where ICANN pushes all the domain registrars to send an email every year validating the whois. So if you have registered a domain, you must have got an email from ICANN every year asking you whether these whois details are valid or not. So that may be something to work around, so that ISPs are poked every year so that they update their whois records or don't get lazy. The other complicated problems is that it's in many markets, it's more easier to register legal entities, and due to shortage of address space, it's easier to get more addresses by having virtually more entities. And this becomes complicated because whenever we are in those markets, we often find ISPs coming up with several prefixes which they want to announce, whether as a customer or as a peer, while many of those prefixes belong to totally different legal entities. How can you technically differentiate whether these are route hijacks or valid announcements? It's just too complicated. There's no pattern in which you can take that other than maybe just believing on their email or maybe just taking in written from them. So that gets tricky unless RPKI or something of that sort is implemented at a larger scale, because one has to accept operators coming up with several pools belonging to several different entities, all announced by single ASN, even with totally different domain names on the whois records of those. And one associated, but maybe not from the whois side of things, is often the inaccuracy of the IRR data. So in many cases, we find that the import and export IRR data is often outdated by operators, and that makes it harder at a backbone level to filter out those prefixes. If you want to generate automated filtering, which is probably in a way which everyone is heading to at a point of time. So for that, you need a technical way to generate those filters, and IRR becomes very important, and most of operators don't update that. So how would you know who their transit provider is? Is the announcement you are listening to from a peer, is that supposed to announce you at all or not, based on what they have published in whois? So those are some of the points, and I like the point around the CGNet which just came up. That's very interesting, and I come from India, and we see CGNet being deployed at very large scale, and that is becoming a problem as well, because you can't map end user, and there is a kind of false belief that you can map end user if you start storing the translation logs, while in reality translation logs can work only if you have the port details from where connections are being initiated, while no one keeps them. So it's still in a broad way a half-baked solution which is being pushed around, and it becomes more of a technical hassle at a scale. So while it's true CGNet breaks things around mapping users, but at the same time there is no technical solution at this point of time other than to say IPv6. Thank you.
Thank you, Anirudh, for giving a good perspective from the network operator's point of view. Now, I think for the excellent presentation by the panelists here and for sticking to the time. So I will request now the floor is open for questions or any comments. They can introduce yourself at the mic and then come one by one. Can come to this side.
Hello, I am Rajesh Jain, speaking in personal capacity. First of all, thanks Mr. Navika for a very nice presentation. Thanks. I think it is better. I am Brajesh Jain, speaking in personal capacity. Thanks, Mr. Navinda, for nice presentation on the CGNet issue. And comment by, I think Mike doesn't like me. Thanks, Anurag. But in the case of CGNet, the issue here is identify the operator. So while CGNet cannot help in identifying the user, but it can definitely identify the operator is my one comment. Second thing is, thanks Mr. Richard for saying that LEAs are also part of community. Over last 10 years, that's definitely a change in the community proceedings in the APNIC. Now my question is, we are talking of who is accuracy of IP addresses which are in the registries of RIRs. And I heard or I know that the percentage of IP addresses which are not in the IRR registries are to the tune of 18-20%. I may be wrong about the percentage. Now, what about the accuracy of those IP addresses? And in one of the presentations where Geoff presented, he said that these IP addresses suddenly come for a moment and then they disappear. And we are not able to, when they are not in the record at all, whether you do RPKI, whether whatever you do, that is one problem we should all try to resolve. So maybe some comment can come. Thank you.
Any comments?
Yeah. Thank you, Rajeshji, for the question. About the CGNet, because as a law enforcement agency, as an investigator, we have to, when the incident comes up, we have to coordinate. When we trace the IP address, we have to coordinate with the service provider because to maintain the chain of custody. Because when we produce the document in the court, it has to be in these steps, and it is the only way that we can coordinate with them. Because behind the IP address, many information are involved. So we always seek that information from the service provider. So this is the big question for the service provider in Nepal from our side also, to make the infrastructure in such a way that please provide the information in the accurate manner so that we can proceed our investigation in a proper way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would request the people to make a very brief comments and questions, please.
Thank you. My name is Ashwin from Indonesian National ICT Council. It's very interesting. Hello, okay. Well, they hack us, you know. Well, it's interesting when I listen to the presentation on the law enforcement agency. Our colleagues from RIPE, you are looking after European area, right? And how you try to secure the area. My question is simple actually. Today, for example, Germany already passed a law that will fine operator like FB and so on if they do not remove hate speech in 24 hours after they were told. They should do investigation and within 24 hours, if it is true, they should remove it. If they cannot remove it, they will be fined. That's the new German law. I do not know how about other European countries, perhaps they will do the same thing. In other countries too, there are also some regulations where an e-commerce online shopping center, for example, if one of the merchants in that shopping center sold illegal product, then the online shopping center should be online e-commerce can also be fined too. So why cannot you do that at the same thing like them? If the operator got a criminal act, like, I don't know, whether sending files or doing fake bank account, fake bank numbers and so on, phishing, whatever, they give them 24 hours to investigate that. And if they cannot find wrong or right, and it is they should close the particular websites if they are really wrong. They should know their customer. And if I can, or LACNIC, or RIPE-NIC, and RIPE-NCC can find them, I'm certainly the cyberspace will be much better. Germany has done that, many countries have done that, why not ICANN-NIC? Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions there. Firstly, we do not deal with content. We only deal with the IP addresses to our members. That is our responsibility, and that is what we take responsibility for, is the administration of the IP addresses to the members. What those members and their members and the end users, as we call them further down the chain, use those IP addresses for to commit criminal acts is out of our mandate. There's nothing that we can do as RIPE-NCC regarding the usage of those IP addresses. We only administer the supply of them to the members. However, if one of our members gives us fraudulent documentation, stolen documentation, false passport, bank details, credit cards, etc., for us to give them to us, for us to give them the resources, we won't do that, and we will report those to the local authorities. That someone who lies to us and giving us fraudulent documentation to get resources, we will deal with that robustly and we'll report those to the authorities. Does that answer it? Was there another bit in there?
Yes, perhaps a simple thing. If you find a phishing bank account, xyz.com is doing phishing, why don't you find VeriSign, which is the operator of .com, for example?
Yeah, but as I said, that is not a RIPE-NCC. We're not mandated to do that, but I'll let Craig can...
I think one of the points that we have to be very clear about is that domain names function very differently from IP addresses. So when someone is doing bad things using a domain name, the domain name can be taken down and not resolved to an IP address, and you can actually block it. But IP address doesn't work in the same way. So, so you can't take down an IP address in the sense that to stop the routing of the information to that. So it works in a very, very different way technically.
Okay, thank you. Kenny Huang, Executive Council member of APNIC, also CEO of TWNIC. I was being told by many of our users mentioned about the inaccurate of WHOIS database service. And actually, what we do is we try to encourage our operator try to improve the accuracy of their WHOIS database object. And we even try to encourage them to deploy RPKI service. But the point, as one of the panelists mentioned, there are very, very few incentives for operator that are willing to do that kind of service. So I also question, how can we encourage operator to improve the service quality, and is there any other best way to enforce the implementation of WHOIS database accuracy? Thank you.
Kenny, I think you raised a very good question, and I think that's something that Anurag has very eloquently provided a suggestion in terms of the annual validation in the sort of domain names world. It's a good question that we ask our community as to whether that is something that the community is behind for APNIC to do. In terms of we already are in touch with our members every year. To renew the membership, for example. It's a good touch point where we can actually use that opportunity to say this is the information that you have in the WHOIS registry at the moment. Is it correct? But it'll be an interesting question for the community to answer.
And for the RIPE-NCC, we do something called ARCs, which is basically contacting our members, asking them, is the information that you've populated in the WHOIS still accurate? And we are doing around 3,500, 4,000 in 2017, and we're hoping to increase that in 2018. But remember, we have 18,000 members. And it's a human interaction, so it is quite resource intensive, but we are really focusing on improving as much as we can internally the database ourselves.
I know there's someone from Aaron as well. Perhaps they can, let us know what they do in terms of validating their information as well.
And the mail, Paul, you can take one question.
Yeah, hello. It's Paul Wilson, the head of APNIC. A couple of things. On the ICANN style checks, we actually are discussing and planning for a system of checks to be implemented this year. It's still under development, and it's got to do with planning a series, as Craig said, a series of interactions which have to do with the annual contact that we have with members over membership renewal and so forth. There's quite a lot of different steps that can be involved. I believe we may have some discussion about it in the services session this week. We haven't brought that to the policy SIG or to the APNIC conference because, in fact, I mean, to be honest, I regard it as something that's actually APNIC's responsibility, APNIC Secretariat's responsibility in maintaining an accurate database. We are simply running regular checks to validate data and to make sure it's correct rather than taking any action apart from just correcting data. So that is something that's under planning and happening this year. So I hope that we'll see more progress and greater accuracy as a result. But I'm actually interested in something that Nabindra said, and thanks to you, Nabindra, for being here, and to the rest of the panelists as well. But you mentioned at the end of your presentation about the possibility of a coordinated policy across different RARs, and I'm really very interested to hear whether you have some specific ideas about what a policy might look like and what you might need from your perspective as a user, an important user of the WHOIS data. So very interested in that. And of course, I mean, I think from the point of view of this community, it would be very interested to sort of have some more action points and some more ideas about next steps after this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
Hello, I'm Henry from Indonesia ISP Associations. We've been working very closely to various law enforcement agencies, especially when bad thing happens, they come to us. Basically, they know the IP address of the suspect, and then we trace back to the service providers, right? Then the service provider will trace back to the location of the IP address, and then probably the ground force will take action. But the complaint has been from the law enforcement agency that this process takes so long. Probably by the time we know the locations, the suspect is not there anymore. Now, is there any near futures program tools that we can know the exact geolocations of IP addresses? Because usually the cellular operators, they just register the whole range of IP addresses to their headquarters, not to their allocated BTS locations. So, I'm just wondering whether there is any near future program tools that can enable law enforcement agency to detect location of IP address automatically, not by process of, requesting location, and this, because, by the time we get the allocation, the suspect is gone already. Thank you.
Anybody wants to comment or?
I mean, there are a lot of tools out there that can do that, which law enforcement will have access to depending where they are, because it's not cheap. One of the frustrations that law enforcement have regarding us and the RIRs is that our database doesn't automatically take them to the service provider that they need to speak to. They go from jurisdiction to another jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. That takes an awful long time, especially if the contact information that's in the database is inaccurate. So that's one of their frustrations, and that's one of the conversations that I always have with the competent authorities, is how do we improve that? One of the things that's happening in the RIPE NCC region is that law enforcement, Europol, actually have proposed a policy on abuse C contact to for the RIPE NCC to validate and verify that each year to make sure that is accurate as it possibly can. That policy is in its final stage now, so there should be an announcement from the chair in the next 14 days of where that policy is being approved or not. So there's many things that can be done, but we, as registries, should be really concentrating on what we're responsible for, and that's the accuracy of the database. So law enforcement do not have to go to company A in Germany, company B in America, and company C here in Nepal, because that's a waste of time either. They should be able to say those IP addresses belong to that entity. That's the contact details. Go and speak to them.
Thank you.
No, it's all right. Yeah, he answered most of the question was very good. I mean, because he was saying that. Okay, it's okay. Okay, he raised a very good question. To need to have a direct access to the database or to the IP address by the investigator from the investigative perspective. We always raise this kind of question to have a direct access. But the question always comes about, I mentioned in my slide also about the mutual legal assistance treaty, trans-border issue, transnational issue. So these things have to be addressed in the policies. And so far in Nepal, there is an Electronic Transaction Act 2008. That is not sufficient to have a direct access, as you mentioned, as you asked. So we need to have a cyber law. Luckily, we have to say that our Nepal Telecom Authority, in coordination with Interpol and United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, they are in coordination, they have drafted a cybercrime law. Most probably, these issues will be shut out very soon. But if you talk about today, law enforcement agencies don't have direct access yet. So that is a big challenge for us. Thank you.
One additional point about it. As you can see, based on most of analysts, it's more of a problem in terms of communication rather than a technical problem. I think your question was more around the tools and the technical side and how would you pinpoint to an IP. And if it reaches the right person in an operator, they can easily figure that out. So it's more of how the interaction chain happens, which everyone has discussed. Plus, on your point about registering who is per PTS level, I think that doesn't happen, and that should not actually happen, because that may help lawful authorities, to reach, to actually pinpoint from which location it's happening. But that may still not complete the picture. While at the same time, the downside is it will create a big privacy problem, because now you have various people using internet from that region and everyone tracking them where they are. And it's just going to cause really major problems, especially with more and more websites starting to track based on the IP address and then mapping of that IP address to specific BTS locations. So I think it still makes sense to have the who is to certain headquarters or, district headquarters, state headquarters level for the larger operators.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leslie Nobile with AARON. Craig was asking what AARON is doing with regards to who is accuracy. So it's twofold with AARON. We do upfront vetting before any organization can get into AARON's database. We are actually vetting them, checking legal sources, very thorough before we allow an organization to be registered. And then once organizations and points of contact are registered, we have a policy in the AARON region called the Annual Point of Contact Validation, which requires us to contact every single contact registered in AARON's Whois on an annual basis and ask them to validate and verify or update their information. What we're finding is with the resources that AARON has issued directly to organizations, our rate is about 93% accuracy, if you will. Contacts are actually updating their points of contact information. About 93% of them have. With regards to resources that were issued prior to AARON's establishment, we call them legacy resources. Those are resources issued before, not under any kind of a contract, and they remain in the database, and they're not often updated, but we do contact those people as well, and we're finding that about 45% of our legacy networks actually have at least one validated point of contact. So 55% don't, but 45% of them are being validated. But with our direct customers, 93% are validating.
Thank you.
Amrita Chaudhary, CCUI. I just have a question. With the annual validation, which is used for the domain name, how much of inaccuracy in the domain names have been reduced? That's one part. And with the RDAP process, which is being discussed as an alternative for WHOIS, what are the learnings which have been translated to the new process? Thank you.
Yeah, I know everyone is pointing at me, but I think I can, because you're assuming that I'm an expert in DNS WHOIS. I am not. So I think I'll hand that back to Richard, who is a member of the Public Safety Working Group. Maybe he might be able to respond to that, or anyone else from ICANN, John Crane, or anyone else who's here, but Richard maybe.
I can't really answer that because I haven't been involved in that part of the ICANN environment for the last 3.5, 4 years. So I'm not really up to date of where we are with that, with the accuracy of the DNS WHOIS. I know there's numerous working groups going on regarding trying to redesign it. There's an issue now with the GDPR, with the ICANN WHOIS, and so we don't really know what that's going to look like into May the 22nd, whenever that comes into force. So I'm not really looking, I'm just keep talking to someone from ICANN, because I know they're here. And no, there's no one from ICANN here, but I'll find later by the pool, I'll show you who's from ICANN, and you can ask that question, because I'll be interested in the answer myself.
Hello, my name is George Ko. I'm the Service Director for APNIC, and I just want to add on to what Paul mentioned earlier. In the past APNIC conference, we have had some sessions to talk about how we can better support APNIC members to update their WHOIS contacts. And in fact, this time we also have APNIC services staff here ready to speak to member, and we're actually conducting short surveys on how we can support members to update WHOIS database. So I'd like to invite all the APNIC members here to speak to us at the APNIC Lounge, or anyone who's interested to learn about how update is done in APNIC's region. Thank you.
Do you have more questions, or any CERT perspective, or any other perspective which we can hear from the floor?
Hi, I am Akram Khan from Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. Sorry. My name is Akram Khan. I am from Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. So, WHOIS actually, for that matter, every CERT, I think they agree that WHOIS is the first step towards the analysis. Whenever an incident is reported or any abuse activity is reported to any CERT, WHOIS is the first thing that we are doing. Okay, and around 3-4 years back, we have faced a difficult situation there. There was a very serious incident. One of the government server was hacked, and we traced the IP addresses, and we were so close to the attacker in that case, but later on it turned out the WHOIS information was incorrect. And the IP range, which was actually supposed to be allocated to a particular service provider, was released around 6 months back, but the WHOIS was never updated, and that was the case with, I believe, Erin. And we have also seen that in many of the cases, the service providers are also setting up their own WHOIS servers, especially in the Erin region. So the policy, actually, which will be applicable for the RIRs, my question is whether that policy will be made applicable for the WHOIS servers, which are being set up by the service providers themselves. My question is not clear.
Are you talking about? I missed it. Are you talking about within the Arran region, or
not only Arran region? I'm talking about in general. There is a concept called referral WHOIS actually. So the ISPs themselves are setting up their own WHOIS servers, and the RIRs are mostly pointing to the large service providers, and the referral WHOIS is going to the referral WHOIS servers, and data is getting returned from there. The inaccuracy which we found, actually which caused the problem 2-3 years back, was basically because of that issue only.
Regarding the who's, actually, I'll answer that question slightly differently. In my, when I was a cybercrime investigator for many, many years and now working for RIPE NCC for the last 3, I always hear law enforcement, competent authorities, certs, saying that our database is inaccurate. How many reports do you think that we've received from law enforcement to tell us that our database is inaccurate? None. We have to work together on this. Our database is huge. We just do not have the resources to check every single piece of data if we had all the automated tools in the world. So we need to work together, and this is the messages we need to go out for everyone. We need to work together. If you come across inaccuracies, did you report your inaccuracy that you found in the database to the RIR?
No.
See?
At that time, no.
So we need help. We need your help. We can't do it ourselves. We're here a community. We need to work together to make the database more accurate.
If I could just comment on that question. It is, speaking for APNIC, it's an obligation of our members under our membership agreement to maintain accurate information. So that's the primary responsibility, that's the primary point. We have only one mechanism for members to represent their data, and that's in the APNIC WHOIS data. Aaron has got a more distributed system, and perhaps someone from Aaron could comment about that, how that works. But I'd suggest that, as long as someone is using a WHOIS, providing a WHOIS service in order to provide data under their obligations as an RIR, then their obligations are still subject to the same policy. So regardless of the technical mechanism, the ISP, the RIR member, is still obliged to do what they're obliged to do regardless of the mechanism. It's quite important to think about in terms of how future WHOIS services may be provided through RDAP or other mechanisms as well to distinguish, between the obligation for the accuracy of the data or on the custodian of the data, the separation of that from the technical mechanism that makes it available. But I don't know if Aaron has got anything to remark about the Aaron particular WHOIS distributed WHOIS mechanisms. John Sweeting.
John Sweeting, Registration Services with Aaron. So they run under the same rules. The referral WHOIS servers, the ISPs that run them have the same rules. They're supposed to be up, they're bound by policy to be up 100% of the time and reachable. If anybody reports to us that they're not, then we of course reach out and make sure that they fix that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jarong from the ICANN Asia Pacific office. So Richard, you were wondering where the ICANN people, so here I am. So just to address Amrita's question earlier, so the short answer is we don't know, because it's just too complicated. That's why we have in the ICANN community such a long discussion regarding the next generation WHOIS, and it's an ongoing discussion. The one thing we did try to do was to incorporate into the 2013 Registrar Accreditation Agreement the need for a registrar to check that the registrant is providing the accurate information. So if the registrant does not respond within 15 days, that's when you have issues of the domain names being suspended. The other thing that I think would help with from this community as well is if you do come across a case where the WHOIS information is actually inaccurate, you can just Google WHOIS inaccuracy, ICANN. There is a WHOIS inaccuracy complaint form. So it goes to ICANN, and we will work with the registrar to try to rectify this. So it's very similar to what Richard was saying to an earlier question about, when you find out something, the WHOIS is inaccurate, did you take any action, did you report it? And that's the issue that we have as well. So hoping that as a community we could help each other. Thank you.
I think I can just comment a minute about that. Amrita's question that whenever there is abuse in the domain names, when you come up that registrants are not giving the right picture, you can suspend those domains immediately. That's kind of thing available with the, at least in the NICSI, we did couple of times those kind of things where we came to know that their contact number or names or even the country is quite different than what they are booked from where. So we did immediately that. Yeah, Mr. Brijesh Jain.
Brajesh Jain, thanks to Erin person for giving data of the legacy IP addresses that about 45% they have got some contact details there. Richard, do RIPE have some such figures that what kind of legacy addresses informally or formally are in the record, and similarly whether in EPNIC we have some such data? Thank you.
Yeah, we will also have legacy addresses. What percentage? I'm very quickly looking over to my registration manager who's skipping towards the mic.
Andrea Cima, RIPE NCC Registration Services. In the RIPE region, about 50%, a bit more, let's say about 55% of all the legacy space is under a contractual relationship between the legacy holder and the RIPE NCC. And this is done on a voluntary basis by the legacy holders, according to a policy which has been created about 4 years ago. And when they enter into a contractual relationship with the RIPE NCC, we verify that they are indeed the legitimate holder, and we verify all the documentation and that all the data is correct and up to date.
Thank you.
Thanks. So out of 4,000 million IP addresses, 800 million are legacy, and 400 million are in some form, sort of these things. So 400 million IP addresses are still out of the net. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Now we have left around 8 minutes to wrap up this session. So I will go one by one to our panelists to say just a line about how to improve the critical thing in the who is accuracy and their involvement.
I think this is a very interesting discussion and one that we can't have enough of. Who is accuracy, I think, is only one layer of the issue that we're facing. So we at APNIC engage a lot with law enforcement agencies throughout our service area. And I think, as Navinda has pointed out, the bigger issue is actually around cross-jurisdictional access. And AMLAT is a very slow system. The number of conferences that we go to and the solution is always about cooperation. So, what's in my head is that at some point, I think we need to have an answer for that. And sort of putting an idea out there is perhaps the answer lies within contractual framework rather than legal framework. If contractually we can bind different people across different countries together regarding the release of information in a very specific case of investigation of, say, a serious crime, then that allows a service provider to release the information, for example. I think it needs some fine-tuning, but I think we need to start thinking something along those lines because crossing the jurisdictional framework is very, very difficult.
So my brief suggestion and my brief what I've learned is we all have to work together. So we talk about the accuracy, we talk about the database, we talk about the percentage. In every aspect, it's all our responsibility. So my suggestion is we have to introducing globally coordinated policy in all our regions. And within Nepal, in Nepal perspective, a regulatory body like Nepal Telecom Authority, concerned ministry, and all law enforcement agency has to work together, and we have to work on these issues, what APNIC has read so far. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you, and we are doing this in our region. I know Aaron is doing it in theirs, that we work very closely with law enforcement and try and join those dots. So if you're about later, I'll give you a few of my contacts and we can help you out with that. Carrick Grade NATs, so that's not just an issue for here, that's an issue globally, and there's an awful lot of work going on Carrick Grade NATs with law enforcement at Europol, and you've already mentioned Interpol. MLATs, that's a conversation that will be going on forever. Regarding the accuracy of the database, and you're quite right, we need to work together, and part of the problem also is that law enforcement still have this issue about the word accuracy, because it's different for our community. But we need to work together, and it would be very helpful if law enforcement, and I keep saying this everywhere I go, need to let us know, and we have, like APNIC have, we have on our website an easy drop-down form to fill in to show any inaccuracies that you come across, and that way it would help. May not help everything, but any little step forward in helping the accuracy of the database would be really appreciated.
So, as we already discussed all in detail about more interaction between RIRs and the members, whether it's an yearly email or something like that sort of, that's of course going to help. Another point I would like to mention here, which is closely related, is the fact that there are lots of bogon routes visible in the routing table, and a significant part of them are the allocations to RIRs which are visible in the routing table from various ISPs. They are just unallocated address space. And they pose similar danger as we have been discussing around lawful agencies finding it hard to track them. So we operate a popular tool, bgp.he.net, and you may go on that tool and click on the bogon routes. You'll find that there are a number of prefixes spread across all the 5 RIRs, which various ISPs are announcing. So probably there is more work required in that regards, whether it's around contacting those ASNs to stop those announcements, or towards educating their upstream providers to do their due diligence and ensure that these routes do not appear in the routing table.
Thank you. Well, I want to just present a different dimension, and I think it's the discussions we're having at the ICANN level where we are beginning to see quite, the intersection between which is at the core of key issues of accountability and privacy. On one end, there's the issue of accountability or privacy and accountability that's looking specifically at considering safeguards for protecting data. Well, on the other hand, there's also the issue of ensuring, accuracy of registration of data and ensuring that you're enabling access to that for law enforcement. So that intersection that is still being discussed, and especially with the oncoming or upcoming General Data Protection Regulation, the European one, has highlighted the ways in which internet governance is now bumping into traditional regulation. And so, like we're seeing in the case of the European Union, we're going to see an increasing emphasis while the internet is global, at the national and regional level, you're going to see an swaying by regulations of a particular nation or region. So the concern here is ensuring that while we're maintaining that what we in our area we call private internet governance, but at the same time, perhaps holding back to ensure that we do not get government interventions. So those are the two issues that those are the two areas that we're likely to see struggle, especially when it comes to WHOIS data. Thank you.
Okay, so now this session, I would like to thank every panelist here who gave a perspective of the APNIC, ARIN, and RIPE, and the AFRINIC, and all those areas. So before the closing, I would like to highlight the APNIC survey 2018, where the EC commissions the APNIC survey every 2 years. This is independent and anonymous to gather feedback from members and their other key stakeholders about APNIC services and the challenges facing the internet community. Focus groups and individual interviews are completed thanks to everyone in the community who participated. Online survey for this year will start in June 18 for 4 weeks to be conducted by Survey Matters. I would request to community to participate, and survey results will be presented at APNIC 46 in Numia. So with this, I would like to close this session and thank everyone from the floor as well as APNIC and the panelists to make this session great. Thank you. Thank you very much.